the in route is often like teaching something, just sharing that people are loved and that there are so many people out there that need to hear that. It amazes me sometimes because, if you're in ministry world, you hear it a lot and these people know that they're loved and all that good stuff. It's just a common knowledge thing. But then you go on somewhere like TikTok and you see a pastor just reminding everyone, just wanted to let you know that the one that created you absolutely loves you. And you see the comments and you're just like, oh my goodness, the amount of people out there that need that reminder.
That was the voice of Sammy Kelly from Digivangelism. She's our adjunct professor on this session of pastoring in the Digital Parish. My name is Ryan Dunn, and I get it. You're busy. You've got a sermon or lesson to write. You've got people to visit or check in upon. There's that book that the bishop assigned you to read. And now you need to do digital ministry. I've seen so many stories of ministers taking sabbaticals or searching for another job because they're tired, burned out, or feel like they've lost their sense of call. I perceive that that's happening because we're in a time of transition when ministry is really changing. And it's changing in a stressful way because a lot of us are currently stuck between two worlds, the digital and the analog, or in person. In a way, ministers are now multi-site ministers for a digital campus and an analog campus. And the challenge is that only a small portion of our ministerial population has been trained for multi-site ministry. Sammy Kelly from Digivangelism joins us for this session of Pastoring in the Digital Parish. Sammy is going to share a vision for batching work so we can build upon some of the things we're already doing in order to thrive in digital ministry, because you don't need more work to do you? She also offers some great tips for starting out on new platforms and more. Digivangelism studies trends daily so that they can offer resources with the hope in prayer it's going to help you more effectively share your message of hope, healing, and light online. So let's meet Sammy. Well, Sammy, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing the story about Digivangelism with us. You and I were at a conference together. You were a presenter. I was an attendee in the room in virtual space, and it was a digital church conference. I was surprised to learn at that conference that a majority of the attenders, or attendees, I should say, were solo pastors. So in your work, are you finding now that you're working and consulting with a lot of solo pastors?
Yeah, so here with Digivangelism, or Digi for short, if that's easier to say, with Digi, we're focused on progressive communities, and so a lot of mainline churches and faith communities. And so a lot of the people that we're talking to are solo pastors. Maybe they'll have an assistant minister or like a seminarian or just some solid staff on board with them. But for the most part, yeah, small or medium-sized communities with one central leader. And I just gotta say, because your question, do we consult with them or work with them? We're not actually doing like a ton of one-on-one consulting right now. Here and there, for those that have reached out, we are doing so. But this is still like a growing ministry, a growing company. And so the here and there right now is good as we develop some other ways to continue to train people in digital ministry, but it's not like an open all-day experience quite yet.
Yeah. Well, you've been in business for a little over a year, correct?
Yeah, it's been a kind of a dream for a couple of years, and it's been more official in the past year as we kind of step into that online space ourselves.
Yeah, well, this is such a changing landscape. Like, I feel all the time, like 1 week I'm ahead of the curve, and then 72 hours later, I feel like, oh man, everybody's doing something that I feel like I need to be doing. Has your business really shifted from where you were like 13 months ago when you started?
As far as where we started 13 months ago, we're just trying to look at what people are asking and respond to that well. So I honestly don't think that has changed a ton, because we are just focusing on like putting out as much free material that can be helpful for people as we develop some other plans to be helpful in other ways, perhaps for paid ways in the future. Those ways have changed a lot. Like, you know, the ideas that we had 2 years ago were like, oh yeah, this could be really neat. Yes, it's a completely different landscape now as to what actually is going to be helpful for those solo pastors, for those faith leaders. As far as the just listening and putting out content each week, I mean, it's still the same. It's different content, I would say, than I thought it would be, but it's okay. It's expected.
Well, Sammy, what are people asking about? Like, what kind of content are people requesting?
Yeah, so a lot of leaders are starting to realize that this is something they have to invest some time into. And some of them don't have any experience with digital ministry whatsoever. And so a lot of them are kind of just like, where do I start? What do I do? What are these platforms? Which ones do I really need to pay attention to? I'll have people message me sometimes about random platforms like, is this worth investing in? And I'm like, no, just focus on like the big hitters and where your people are and that sort of thing. Yeah, they want to reach people, which is a great, noble cause. Just no idea really how to do that online.
Yeah. Where's a great place to start then? So if I am the passionate evangelist who wants to get online, like where's a great place for me to start?
Yeah. So 2 things. First, if you don't have a website, start with website just so people can find you.
Okay.
Not a lot of people will jump to that because they're like, oh, I want to know about TikTok. It's like, that's great, but slow down. Because if someone's Googling your Christmas worship services and you don't even show up on Google because you don't have a website, or your website is severely outdated, which unfortunately a lot of faith communities find themselves in that circumstance, get that in order, make sure that the information people need to be able to join your community, even on one given day, is up there. But then as far as social media is concerned, I always point people back to their people.
Okay.
Where are your people spending their time? Because the answer is not going to be the same for everybody. One community might have a lot of people really active on Instagram, and then there's a lot I can share about how to do that well. But if your community's on Facebook or TikTok, not really worth your time to invest in learning Instagram. It's wasted energy and effort, and we don't have time for that. We don't have the energy to waste energy these days anyway. So focus on where your people are is really what I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Especially when you're trying to balance out really the kind of multifaceted style ministry that so many are called into right now, where it's like, okay, they need to care for their kind of quote unquote in-person flock, and then feel a pull towards also maintaining like a digital flock or making inroads on some kind of evangelism online. When you're talking about a website, what are some good evangelistic tools or good evangelistic resources or presence to portray through a website?
Sure. So when I think evangelism, I just think you're sharing something that's meaningful to you. So hopefully as a community, it's your mission. Maybe it's just share the gospel, share the good news. For us, we want to help leaders share hope, healing, and light. That's what we focus on. So say that, first of all, like whatever's important to you and your community, put it on there and make it clear so that people aren't just like, oh, this faith community is online and exists just to exist. And so they figured they needed a website and now they exist online. No, you have a purpose. Tell people why you're there, why you exist in the first place. And then again, with the details for how to contact you, when you meet, where you're located. Like it sounds so simple and like basic level, and I get that, but the amount of communities that are missing a very crucial detail, it amazes me almost every time. And I think it can be fixed with asking a friend that is not so connected to your community to just look at your website and offer some feedback. So it's not like a super like skillful tool or anything that I'm sharing, but I do encourage people to have someone else audit their website, just look at it and say, what questions do you have? Or what is confusing? A lot of times we'll use like churchy language and we're like, ooh, this will really reach people. But to someone else, it seems either intimidating or they have no idea what you're saying. Like the message is just not coming through. So those are really important. There's also, just making sure your website loads quickly by having your images sizes a little smaller, different like tricks like that can make your website function well so that people don't get bored and jump off of it.
Yeah. We feel a lot of pressure much of the time to have like cool widgets and stuff on our website. Like, is a video presence really necessary, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm one co-owner of a 2-part leadership here at Digi, and Michelle is actually my like website guru, as I call her online often. So usually I let her answer the website kind of questions when it comes to widgets and things, building nature. But as far as your question on video, that's definitely my domain. And I would say, yes, as long as it's not lagging your website down, it's very helpful to have video. In fact, one of the big recommendations that I was going to give is to consider making a welcome video for your community, and no more than like 2 minutes, 3 minutes if you really need it, but just a short, like who are you? Who is this community?
Mm.
Can you show it off visually? The statistics tell us that people are being drawn towards video on Facebook. You can see it with all the new apps being like short videos. So how can we use that change in our mindset in how we process intake information? How can we use that to communicate who we are as a community? So I think welcome videos are fantastic, and I highly recommend them.
Well, in talking about social media then, what are some initial steps that you recommend people take into social media? Like, do you need to make sure that you're posting every day, or what are we looking for when we start kind of a social media presence?
Sure. So a big thing that as someone who uses social media a lot, it feels very natural to me, but I've talked to quite a few pastors lately that when I say it, they're like, oh, social media doesn't have to be a show. It doesn't have to be perfect. It shows authenticity if you are real, if you are able to show kind of behind the scenes kind of video or photos or just narration. If you can be silly, if you can go off script, like these things that you got to like figure out where your boundaries are as a faith leader. You got to figure out how you are okay with being perceived online or in general. But there are a lot of details to figure out with any platform. And once you know where your people are, I would say invest in that. But no matter what platform and no matter where your people are spending time, figure out how to be you online.
Okay.
And going with that is the community needs to show itself off as it is. This doesn't necessarily mean like beautiful 4K footage, cinematic videos. It doesn't have to be a beautiful experience, but it needs to be real for people, and you need to get a little vulnerable, even though that's scary for people sometimes to show their face for the first time if they're not used to it. People connect with people, and so that is a huge initial step that I try to encourage people toward.
Yeah. Okay. So are you encouraging then pastors to utilize their personal social media accounts more so than like a branded church social media account?
I don't think it has to be the personal page. I think if people want to go that route, I think that's okay. And you need to just kind of think about how are you going to show up on these platforms separately? Like these are still separate spaces. So if you leave your community, you leave your community one day, what comes with you and what is part of the community is just something to play around with. But I think that they can show up on their community page. Okay. And I don't think it's necessarily just pastors. I think it's staff, it's leadership, it's the community members themselves, like how, to whatever degree people are comfortable with being shown online and that sort of thing. You got to take that into consideration for sure. But yeah, it's not just a solo pastor show. It's how does this community show up, and can we show some behind the scenes of what these people do as they lift up this community?
So as I'm the church leader who's hearing this and wants to be involved on like a social media platform, the struggle a lot of times is just the time, right? Yeah. I've got a sermon to write, I've got the newsletter to edit and visitations to do and that kind of thing. So what are some ways that we can start to batch things together or develop a rhythm of life for maintaining like a digital ministry presence as well?
Yeah. One of the big things I lifted up in that conference that we were both at was you can't do everything.
Yeah.
You can't do it all. But you can do something, and can you do that well? And so going into it with that mindset of like, I might not be able even to do everything I want to do, but what can I figure out how to be consistent with, or what can our community be consistent with? And the community means not just the pastor. So what other hands are there that can help with this? Even if it's just like, hey, that person likes taking photos of when we're together. Can they be intentional when they're taking photos to remember to either send them to someone to post or post them? Okay. Can we give them permission to post them? Like there are these little pieces of these things that we try to do. How can we, first of all, hand any of that out? Other people willing and able to help? And if we can, to do so. The other thing, you mentioned sermons, and I love encouraging people to repurpose that sermon content with no shame.
Okay.
Every week, presumably, pastors are writing up a sermon, or praying up a sermon. And so that's a lot of time and effort and like spiritual stuff in that sermon that could sometimes just go on for 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes, and then it's done. Mm-hmm. And so how can you take what the Spirit has given you and make more out of it throughout the week? Because the reality is not everyone's there for your sermon. And even if they, watch it later, maybe they're distracted or they're distracted during it. Maybe they fell asleep because they just it wasn't a good time for them. I don't know. But how can we share the good news that was in that sermon, that specific message, before and after? I think there's a lot of opportunity to give people like a preview, to give people things to think about ahead of time, to kind of get those like gears turning a little bit. And then after, to just like recap. Yes, you can like tell it again in a 2 to 3 minute video, summarize it, or ask people what stood out to them. Like maybe it's a Bible study. There's so many ways you can go with this. It could be graphics, conversations. Like it really just start there. I would say start there, and with the behind the scenes things that are already happening. So basically you're starting with 2 things that are already going on. It's not like you have to sit down and dream up what kind of content do we want to post from our church page. Like it doesn't have to be this really difficult thing. You just got to kind of build it into your mental system and your routine to actually show up and share these things as they happen, which does take time. It does take time. Like it's not nothing. It's an intentional decision, but it doesn't have to be like, this whole separate thing.
Yeah. Well, and you can develop a rhythm for that then too, which probably makes it quite a bit easier. So you're in the rhythm already of doing a weekly sermon for the most part. Yes. A lot of our leaders are. And then on top of that, you can take a weekly rhythm of doing like maybe 30 to 45 second video clip, right? And, ask a follow-up question, or if you're in the practice of doing like a call to discipleship at the end of your sermon, like following up with that on Monday, like, hey, how have you responded to what you heard this past weekend?
Yeah, there are so many ways that can manifest on social media or online. And it's almost hard to give, well, those were some great examples, but it's almost hard to be like, here's what you do, because depending on where your people are, it could look so different. Like, I know that there are quite a few faith leaders right now doing a lot of ministry on like Discord and Marco Polo. And it's like, I don't even know a lot about these spaces.
That's the first I've heard of Marco Polo right there. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. And so like, I kind of have the idea of like how that could look, but that's going to look a lot different than if your people are, 100% of the time on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. Like, it's just kind of, you got to have to scale down where are you going to start focusing on, and then figure out the ways that you can connect with people on those platforms. And reuse your sermon while you do it.
Yeah. Totally. Well, let's talk about platforms a little bit. Like, do you recommend for the church that's just starting out? I know you said look for the one where your people are, but if you're at a fresh point, like you might not have a sense of where your people are. So is there a great platform to kind of make that initial foray into digital ministry?
Sure. If someone was a pastor and they said that to me, I'd probably push back a little bit and say, well, maybe start that conversation with them, send out a poll, ask people straight up, where do you spend time online? I'm trying to get a feel for what would be helpful. But if you just want to like dive in somewhere, Facebook is a big heavy hitter as far as social media platforms. It's almost having a Facebook page. It's almost like having a website. It does not replace a website. I would still recommend having a website, but I know a lot of people will just like search on Facebook if they're looking for something, whether that's a restaurant to go out to eat or a church that they're thinking about visiting. They want to see what's going on at this community. So I would say Facebook's a good place to start. It doesn't mean that your people are active there. And it also doesn't mean that your posts are always going to get seen by them in a pesky Facebook algorithm land. The other thing to consider is, are you trying to reach the people in your community, or are you just trying to like put your community out there or be out there as a faith leader? Because TikTok and Instagram Reels have totally different algorithms than Facebook and normal Instagram. So if you're just trying to reach anybody and everyone, doesn't matter if they go to your church, those might be worth looking into as well.
Okay. At this point, when we're talking about like TikTok and Instagram Reels, like how are people using those platforms as a way of like introducing others to their faith community?
So I think the in route is often like teaching something or just sharing that people are loved and that there are so many people out there that need to hear that. It amazes me sometimes because, if you're in ministry world, you hear it a lot and these people know that they're loved and all that good stuff. Not that it gets old, but it's just a common knowledge thing. But then you go on somewhere like TikTok and you see a pastor just reminding everyone, just wanted to let you know that the one that created you absolutely loved you. And you see the comments and you're just like, oh my goodness, the amount of people out there that need that reminder. It's not one to just sleep on.
Yeah.
Teaching, a lot of faith leaders are on TikTok, at least the ones that we follow, teaching, and maybe it's their sermon on Sunday. And then they come back and they're like, I talked about this thing. Here's this scripture passage. Let me tell you about what I said. And it's just using the platform the way it's laid out. So you're filming vertical video of yourself, maybe like quick snippets so that it's not too boring. You're using the platform how it's meant to be consumed, but sharing the same gospel message. And so I see those as inroads a lot of times where people will then comment and be like, well, I would go to a church like yours, or like, you're the only kind of pastor I'd listen to, or whatever, like, because they're, again, real to them. They're being authentic. Okay. They're showing up where the people are. And so I do see a lot of those pastors like, here's the link to the website for our church. Like, if you want to check it out, there you go. Okay. So it doesn't mean they're close to you locationally, but they might be interested and they definitely need to know that they're loved. Yeah.
The other question I had coming out of what you just shared, it's really the $1 million question, like literally, is how do you get people to see what you're producing? So you take your sermon clip, you take your quote from the sermon, or repurposing all this brilliant content. How do you actually get eyeballs on it?
That is, again, a platform specific question.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have one in mind?
Yeah, well, if we're talking about like Facebook being the big hitter where people are most likely to start, let's start there. Like Facebook, how do you get seen?
Well, unfortunately, though, the best answer, if you really need to be seen today, is probably to boost the post.
Yeah, okay.
Is to actually put money behind it.
All right, yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the way, like Instagram, even because Facebook and Instagram are connected now, that's the way they're leaning so that they can make money. Shocker that they want to, be a profitable company. They're trying to encourage this paid reach so that people actually need to put money on ads to get it out to people. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go and boost your sermons every single week just to get them seen. I think good video techniques are going to be helpful. It doesn't mean that you're definitely going to get 1 million views or anything, but you're going to have a better shot if your videos are kind of well produced. What I mean by that, you're going to have a better shot than someone who just maybe like sets up an iPhone in the corner, which I'm all for, like using what you have for technology of iPhones that you have. But if you set up your iPhone for worship and you just leave it on record for 10 minutes and the first 10 minutes of your video is like set up.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you don't cut that off. Like, imagine if you posted your podcasts and RO chatter in the beginning. It's maybe not as engaging as like a nice intro, or even just starting right off the bat with content. Some people like to cut up their stuff so that, like, if you just want to watch the sermon, there you go. You don't have to sit through the whole hour-long worship service. And your people, if you ask them or if you give them an outlet to like express how they think you could do better, they'll probably tell you that. Someone would maybe anonymously say, I don't want to watch the whole service. I like the pastor's sermon. Can you tell me where that starts every week or whatever it is? So those type of like just using that platform for the end consumer, which is ideally the people in your community or the people that they're going to share it with.
All right. Well, I got plans to break into TikTok. So how am I going to get my videos viewed on TikTok?
Sure. I always recommend people pay attention to trends. Okay. I also don't know if you've used TikTok. That's another big thing, is if you've never used TikTok, take time and pour some hours. It's really easy to lose hours of your life on the platform.
I'm a big time lurker. Like, I'm surfing through all the time. Yep.
Okay, good. Then you know how it can consume you. But also it's good to just know how people are using the platform, because otherwise some people will get on TikTok and they're posting like horizontal videos repurposed from YouTube. And it's like, that's not going to fly. And another thing that might be helpful is to look at similar faith leaders on TikTok. You can check out our TikTok if you want, but just like see how these people are using it and pay attention to what they do, because trends just fly by like this. And if you're able to make use of trends in the mix of maybe whatever your intent is for being on TikTok, so I'm not really sure what you're going to be doing. Maybe trends aren't even on your mind and you have all this other stuff you want to do. Can you mix them in a way that feels authentic? Because that is just very natural in the algorithm to get picked up. And we've only had like a couple go viral. We're not on it so consistently, but a lot of the people that are very, very consistent with their videos, you get a video or two that goes mega viral, and all of a sudden the rest of your videos get a lot of views too, because everybody like finds your channel. I mean, you know how it is. If you get a viral video and you're like, wow, this person seems really neat, I want to go check out whatever else they've been up to, not realizing that the viral video was 3 months ago and they posted all this new stuff since then. So just kind of like keeping at it and paying attention to like what is going big. And there's, I mean, I could keep going, but I don't want to spend the whole time on TikTok either.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about Digivangelism. Where did the idea come from to start a company that's doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So probably 2016-ish, I think we've decided. Michelle and I were in the same community church, and we were kind of like the techie people that were not only helping our own church with how to show up online, but started speaking to other congregations and we have synods, local denominational groups basically that needed help because nobody, like you said, teaches pastors how to do this in seminary.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just like a calling moment where you're like, wow, I am passionate about this. I'm skilled at this. And there's a huge need for this kind of education. And so we just kind of made sure that it was a prioritized thing in our lives, even recognizing that at that point we had a lot going on as far as I was in seminary and just like, you know, work things, life things, that it wasn't necessarily going to be a full-time gig anytime soon. And so we were okay with that. And then in 2020, life kind of shifted in a way that allowed for more time to be put into Digi. And so ever since August 2020, we've been putting out free content, like I said, every week, just getting to know what people's struggles are and trying to address those needs and get to know people along the way. So we've got a lot of exciting things coming out in the next few months, in the next year or so. But for right now, we're just hanging out online. No, making sure we understand the platforms well. We're trying to educate people wherever we can about digital ministry and its importance. And very excited to kind of have found our niche with the progressive leaders of spiritual community folks, because there's not necessarily a lot of mainline people doing this. I mean, there are, but not as many as maybe like evangelical Christians have like a ton of this kind of stuff going on, which we feel we can repurpose for the people that we connect with the most.
Well, I think it might be helpful for some of our church leader friends to hear, like, what is some of the content that you're producing that's getting the most traction or that people are downloading the most?
Oh my goodness. It's so funny. Michelle and I meet multiple times a week and we track this stuff every week. And we always think it's funny when something like blows up or just takes off in viewership beyond other things, because it's never what you think is going to be.
Right. It's like giving a sermon almost. It's like, oh man, I've got the best sermon coming up. And people are like, yeah, that was okay.
Yeah, exactly like that. I've seen it on TikTok a lot where folks will be like, oh, I spent all this time on this perfect TikTok and it like flopped is the term. But then I like randomly just pulled out my phone and recorded one and that's what went viral.
Yeah.
It feels similar. It's not like digital ministry for progressive spiritual leaders is like a huge niche. So we're not going mega viral frequently. But to answer your question, we recently had one on TikTok and then I'll share one from YouTube. But the one on TikTok was talking about kind of like poking fun at church leaders and churches, why they don't want to be online, or like things that they will do other than being online. Like we will put all our effort into sending out this mailing or making signs to stick in the yard and like anything to get people in our building and not reach them where they're already spending how many hours a day online. And interestingly enough, that picked up because people had so many opinions about it. People were upset that on every level they were upset. Like, some were like, why aren't pastors getting online? And others were like, pastors shouldn't be online. We do need people only in the buildings. Like, it doesn't count online. So you have all these perspectives being shared. Maybe you've run into that as well.
I've heard it. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. It just was part of a conversation yesterday about, we are an incarnational people, right? We are lived in presence type people. And trying to build an understanding that we can be present with each other just as we are present with each other right now,
exactly.
Listening to a podcast or over a Zoom call. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I feel like some of our work is almost just bringing awareness to the fact that this is important and continuing to remind faith leaders that people are spending time online and we need to reach them where they are. The YouTube example that comes to mind is because it's one of those ones where I'm like, why is this getting traction? Because week after week, I'll set up and try to make a YouTube video that's very like engaging or whatever based on a topic that we think is particularly helpful at the time. And then this video I made a couple months ago about how to use new Facebook. It was literally just my webcam and I just like hanging out and like saying, this is where you put the profile picture. This is what you do with the cover. Like, I didn't know if anyone would really watch it, but figured why not put it out there?
Yeah. Okay.
It's currently like our most rapidly growing video, which I just was like, okay, it's just interesting because some of those fundamental things that I don't think of as much are things that people need who are getting started. And they're like, all right, my faith community hasn't had a Facebook page. We haven't had an Instagram page. We don't know what TikTok is. How do we start?
Okay.
So it does come back to that whole, where do we begin?
Yeah. All right. Well, going into the fundamentals then, not necessarily in practice, but in theory, like the fundamentals of why we need digital ministry, like as you hear that argument about maybe we shouldn't be online or we need to consistently call people towards our in-person space, what are you using to justify or how are you justifying the digital evangelism?
Yeah. For me, statistics speak loudly, and I don't have any of them memorized to share with you, but the fact that people are not only spending more and more time online, but to me, it's a big signal when marketers are investing more and more time and money into digital, into social media, because as much as churches are not businesses, churches are not like marketing Jesus, but when you kind of break down what the goal is, you're trying to communicate something well. So when you were saying evangelism before, and I said to me, that's kind of like, what are you sharing and how do you communicate that well? We as church leaders and what we try to do as Digi is learn a lot. We can learn a lot from marketers and businesses who are doing a good job at communicating with people. We're trying to reach people. And so paying attention to just the way the world is engaging with one another and not ignoring it.
Yeah. All right. Uh-huh. And I do have some of the stats memorized. So it's like on the low end, it's like 48 minutes on average people are spending on social media daily. So, there is a lot of occupied time. And if we're talking about, in person, we're coming in contact with people for maybe 90 minutes a week. On the long end of things, I mean, certainly there's a lot of room for growth there, and digital offers us that opportunity to do that.
I think it's also an important on-ramp for some people that are never going to come to your congregation in person, or if they do, they're not going to be comfortable enough unless they engage with your community for like a year beforehand online.
Yeah,
it offers a way for people to get to know you with like this low pressure experience, which again, I get that some people would be like, well, we're an incarnational church, we need to be together, and that's not real human connection or whatever. But if the fact is that person's not going to come and see you and join the community until they can scroll on your Instagram or Facebook in their PJs in bed for a couple weeks on end, and then they'll feel comfortable, then, I mean, we can either, like I said, ignore that, or we can embrace that and build it into who we are when we're trying to reach out to all people.
Cool. One final question for you. Do you see digital ministry as more than an evangelism tool?
I think it has to be. And maybe this is just my understanding with the word evangelism. Again, I think of a lot of it. Share the gospel, share the good news, share hope, healing, and light. Sharing one way isn't necessarily a relationship. You could be sharing and sharing and sharing, but people need to hear this other thing. And you don't even know that because you haven't listened at all. And I think that there's a listening angle to it too that I'm not sure is always part of the just sharing. And so, yeah, I think it is more than that, because you need to learn how to build relationships with people. And that looks different on every platform yet again, whether that's encouraging people to respond to some kind of interactive thing or join a Zoom meeting or whatever, encouraging their engagement, encouraging their participation, encouraging, again, sharing back to you so that you know that what you are saying is connected to them. When pastors are preaching, they're not just like preaching for fun. Like, you're preaching to someone. So you got to know who you're preaching to, is kind of what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
All right. There's a sense of relationship that opens up in that. And that's, our conduit oftentimes for like growing in faith, for discipleship.
Exactly.
Okay. I lied. I do have one more question. What should we be going to check out on Digivangelism? What kind of content are we going to want to look for?
So we're on almost every platform. We don't regularly participate on every platform, but if you want to see our most frequently used ones, every week we have a YouTube video and a blog post that comes out. We try to share about that a lot on Instagram. Sometimes this makes its way to Facebook, and we are usually on TikTok. There's enough content to keep you busy on any of those platforms. We talk a lot about social media use, website use, sometimes rogue one-off things that like we've just heard someone asking about. And so we want to share our thoughts on it and our research on it. So we're always open to questions on that sort of thing. 2, keep an eye out for, I've already kind of let this slip online on other platforms. So I'll just say we're working on a digital communications review process where if communities are interested in having a second set of eyes, look at their content and offer like specified instructions. That's going to be something in probably the next 6 months, not anytime soon, but it's on its way out of our heads. So, and that kind of feels like it connects well to the idea of pastors not just preaching in general, but preaching to someone. We recognize that we can share a lot of great ideas and things. And like right now, we've talked for quite a while about high level concepts maybe, but it's hard to really address just specifics unless you really get to know the community itself. Who is in this space? What are you trying to do? What is your mission? And so we're looking to offer more of that in the coming future.
Cool. Right on. Well, thanks, Sammy. So good to talk to you.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Digivangelism.org has a bunch of cool resources and helpful blog posts and videos. It's worth checking out the site no matter where you are in your digital ministry journey. If you'd like to get a hold of me, Ryan Dunn, the best way to do that is at digitalparish@umcom.org. We're off into a new season. Check back next week for the newest episode of Pastoring in the Digital Parish. In the meantime, I want to thank United Methodist Communications for sponsoring this podcast. Also, a big shout out to Reed Gaines, our audio editor, who makes this endeavor sound so good. My name is Ryan Dunn. I'll talk with you again soon. Peace.